Welcome back, Honors. Oh, man. So I know it's been like a hot second since we've gone over some stuff because we were like grading your tests and then like your flip and like on the Minoans and stuff. What I'm going to need you to do, though, is just to be safe. Oh, man. Sorry, it's early. Oh, man. Just to be safe before Monday, make sure you kind of read through that last flip or rewatch it or something like that. But let's go ahead and get into where we left off, right? And we left off talking about the great palace of Canosa, right? So really quick thing I want to go over really fast before we really get after anything else is just the fact that this is not the only settlement by the Minoans. The Minoans actually like covered the entire island of Crete, right? They had several colonies. They started like the tradition of colonization in ancient Greece. They pushed out. They did a lot of different things. They were a very advanced people, all things considered, right? When you talk about just the one palace they built, it was built in the style of the Labyrinth. It's really just kind of selling them a little short, right? But continuing forward, these are all of the areas of which they covered. Huge area. Now they also took over a rugged terrain island, which is a very impressive thing for an ancient people. Something else that they gave to us, which is huge, is they actually were the first ones to start using Greek-style columns, right? So, which became a major architectural theme of the ancient Greeks. So go ahead and write this down, but there are three types of columns whenever we are referring to columns of ancient Greece, right? Three types of columns that you can refer to whenever you're even referring to any kind of columns in modern day. And they all started here with the Minoans, right? Now, the big three are called, one is Doric columns, which are much like these. This would fall into the Doric order, where they actually have just one long, they're inverted, which means the top or the bottom is actually larger than the middle section. And then also, they just have like a flat top to them, right? That's a Doric column. Then you have an Ionic column, which any of you have seen like Hercules, the Disney movie. It's got those curly little swirls on the side of them, goes like this, right? So that's an Ionic column, I-O-N-I-C. And then the last one is called a Corinthian column, right? So C-O-R-I-N-T-H-E-A-N. And Corinthian columns look a little something like, come on, you can do it. There you go, computer. Corinthian column. A Corinthian column looks like this. So they actually have a large pluming out of the top of it, like so, right? So you can actually even see these in Philadelphia today. I was like looking at someone when I was driving home yesterday outside of City Hall, or actually a part of City Hall, right? Oh, excuse me. But yes, some major construction using Greek architectural themes began with the Minoan people. And the Minoans were like super advanced, all things considered. Like this right here are some of the ruins left behind at Canosa, and it's absolutely amazing to see like just the structure of the entire building being supported almost completely from within, which is very impressive. This also gives way to the idea of the labyrinth style of the palace, right? So, and this right here we believe is the throne room of the legendary King Minos, right? Which is actually the reason why the Minoans are called the Minoans, right? The historical community at the time, upon like discovery of Canosa, just came together and they were like, well, according to Greek myth, Minos lived here, so we should call them the Minoans, right? So this right here is an offering plate, and I know that this looks much more like a toilet than it does like anything else. However, it's not. It's actually his throne. Speaking of toilets, though, the Minoans were so advanced that they actually had plumbing. Did you hear what I said? Plumbing. They had sewers that actually carried wastewater away and brought fresh water into the city using a rudimentary system of aqueducts that actually came off of that rugged terrain towards the top of the mountains. That's insane. It's insanely impressive that they ever had the ability to do these things. Like, the Europeans didn't get toilet and plumbing and like sewers again until the 1800s, but the Minoans were doing it in the 2000s BC. Like Rome, why'd you have to fall? You know what I mean? So anyway, continuing forward though, this is what we believe Canosa looked like, their largest settlement that they ever created at its height. Now, this is a believed look of it, right? We don't know this beyond a shadow of a doubt, but look at the clean lines. Look at the beautiful architectural work with the columns. Oh, fun fact about these columns as well, they're slightly different from Greek columns because Minoan columns were actually made of wood because there was a lot of timber resources on Crete. So This thing could hold upwards of 400 people at any given time. Now, all things considered, is that a ton of people in the grand scale of things? No. But is it a lot of people when it's 2,000 years before Christ was born? Yeah, it's a lot of people, right? Just like look at it. Just look at the architecture and the beautiful area. Oh, and another big Greek architectural thing that was coming up, the open courtyard system or the central plaza location, right? So now, continuing forward though, this is what we believe the blueprint of Canosa actually looked like when it was fully laid out, right? Now, really fast, I gotta appease Mrs. Del Rey and Mrs. Gianna, right? So, Gianna Miller, or wait, Miller? Yeah, Gianna? Now, anyway, so let's get into why there was a labyrinth in the first place. So, the ancient Greeks had actually come up with a story as to why they believed that King Minos built his palace in the shape of a labyrinth in the first place. So, Mrs. Del Rey and Mrs. Miller are going to tell us a story on Monday as to how this thing came about. But the reason why is because, according to myth, the legendary King Minos actually had the palace constructed in such a way to hide the thing that he was most ashamed of, right? And what he was most ashamed of was his son. And his son, not even really, it's actually more like his stepson when you really think about it. Sorry, I was about to sneeze. So anyway, when you actually think about it, it's more like his stepson, was the Minotaur, right? So the Minotaur was a half-man, half-bull creature that actually his wife gave birth to, right? And a lot of this is believed because there was like an entire sorry, I won't tell you why the Minotaur was born. I'll leave that up to the ladies, right? So anyway, now the Minotaur, what you need to know is that he exists, right? And he has the Labyrinth Palace of Canosa built around him to try and encase him inside of it and hide the thing that he is most ashamed of, right? But he does have two other children. He has one son, Androgynous, which is believed to be the example of all Greek men and what they should be, right? A superior athlete who goes off to compete in one of the original pre-Olympic games in Athens, right? And he goes off and he competes under a man named King Aegeus, who is actually ruling over Athens at the time, and like actually presiding over the Pantheon Games at the time. But he's in the stayed race, and all of a sudden, pop, he dies, right? He dies competing in these games, and King Minos is furious because like his great prized joy child is now dead, and the Athenians allowed it to happen. So he commands the Athenians, hey, you owe me 7 men and 7 women every single solstice so I can throw them into the labyrinth and feed the Minotaur. And if they can survive, well, I'll let you go. But they won't. And for 3 years, they do this. King Aegeus keeps regretfully sending 7 men, 7 women, and they put them in the labyrinth, and the Minotaur eats them, right? And this is like a CGI Minotaur. It's just kind of funny. So the Minotaur eats them and destroys them until Aegeus' son, Theseus, steps up and says, Father, I will go and I will volunteer as tribute to this tournament. Does this sound vaguely familiar for a little bit? Anybody? Anybody? Very nice, Jackie. That's exactly right. The Hunger Games, right? It's a loosely based off story. Now, continuing forward, though, Theseus decides to volunteer, right? And King Aegeus is just heartbroken. He's like, you're going to die. You're going to die. What am I going to do without you? You're supposed to take over rule after I die. And Theseus says, Father, check this out. I'm going to sail off with 2 ships, one with white sails, one with black sails. If the one with black sails returns first, I have died, and you will have time to prepare yourself for my funeral. The one with white sails returns, I am alive, and we should rejoice that we have conquered, right? So he sails off, stops off at an island, drops his vessels off, goes to Crete, right? But then he meets King Minos' other child, Ariadne, right? Ariadne, this beautiful woman, and they fall in love at first sight. And Ariadne, she's so upset because she thinks the Minotaur is going to kill him. She tells him, look, here, and hands him a mythical ball of thread, right, that he actually uses to keep track of his way through the labyrinth. He goes through the labyrinth. I'm skipping over some details, but he goes through the labyrinth, and he actually slays the Minotaur while it's sleeping by stabbing it directly in the mouth, right? So Theseus actually destroys the Minotaur. Not to be confused with Perseus, which I have said this multiple times, which I know a lot of you are Percy Jackson fans. So Perseus, different. Perseus killed Medusa, right? Destroyed the Gorgon, okay? So, like, that's a very, very big deal, big difference. We'll talk about that difference in the myths and everything later on. But Theseus destroys the Minotaur. and rids Athens of this terrible King Minos, right? So King Minos allows him to leave, and he lets Ariadne go with him as a gift, right? It's kind of messed up when you think about it, that you're sending your own daughter as a gift. But they end up going to the island where they actually had originally dropped off the boats, partied a little too hard, passed out on the wrong boat, and then the boat with black sails actually beat them to Athens, right? And Aegeus is looking out over the shores, sees the boat with black sails, thinks Theseus is dead, and actually kills himself and jumps off the cliffs into the water below, and that's where the name the Aegean Sea comes from. It's named after Aegeus. Love that myth. Very, very solid one. Like I said, there's a whole prelude, prequel thing to it, an origin story movie that goes before it, but it's a great one. Now, anyway, so some Minoan art also depicts female priests, and their religious system was actually really, really intense. One of the craziest things about Minoans' religious systems, as well as the way that they actually survived through their eras, it seems to us in the historical community that they have a much larger appreciation for women than many other ancient Greeks did, right? They also have a much larger appreciation for things like art, dance, music, cultural things, right? Crafting, metal cups, forging metals, precious metals, development of different types of olive oil. The Minoans were a very intelligent people, and they valued the presence of women. Some of them were even depicted as priests in a lot of these, and one of their chief goddesses is actually a snake goddess that's actually pictured here. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's maybe if they would have survived, maybe the sexist ideals of the classical Greeks that would not even allow women to leave the house without permission of a man, maybe they wouldn't have held on. So it's actually really, really cool to think about, right? So anyway, continuing forward though, Minoans also successfully created some of the very first artworks that the world had ever seen called frescoes, right? And frescoes is a form of art using wet plaster and wet paint, right? It's very, very difficult. And during the Renaissance era in Europe, it was considered the hardest and most talented artists in the world were the ones who could develop frescoes, right? So because you have to lay wet plaster down, it's called the intonaco, right? You have to lay wet plaster down in a grid work, and each grid is called a giornato, according to Italians. And they then have to actually paint on top of it, and then as it dries, it becomes one fresco, which means completely fresh, right? And when it dries, this paint actually seeps inside of it, and then it dries permanent. So the paint becomes a part of the plaster. It's a very, very difficult process, but it shows how advanced the Minoans were as a people. And a lot of their frescoes have to do with seafaring themes, right? Dolphins, sea urchins down here, as you can see, fish, which actually gives way to the idea of how developed they were as a trading society as well. So right down somewhere as well, huge trading society, right? Ridiculously very, very, very fluent in the acts of trade. This is one of the things we believe that they actually traded a lot. It's called saffron. It's a type of flower, right? So a lot of people believe the historical community is really split on what they traded it for or what people were buying it for, right? But it was considered to be just as expensive as frankincense or black pepper at the time, which were very, very expensive products, right? Now remember, this is a bartering system at the time. So having saffron was worth a lot of something else, right? So saffron, we believe, to them may have been used as fragrance, religious purposes, a lot of different things. What we use it for today is actually to make a sauce. Italians have been using it to make a sauce called saffron sauce for generations. And it is fantastic over lobster ravioli. I'm just throwing it out there. So anyway, it's like a yellowy sauce. This is another thing that they were very good at developing. It's and just keep this in mind, this is a golden cup, right? It's a precious metal forged cup, right? So luxury items are things that they were very good at making. But here's the creepy part. It's not the fact that the Minoans had this ability. It's where it was found. Where do you think this was found? It wasn't found in Crete at all. It was actually found in a Mycenaean tomb, right? So that begs the question of well, wait a minute, how did it get there and why did they end, right? Well, no one's certain why the Minoans' civilization came to a complete close, but at about 1400 BC, control of the sea passed completely to the Mycenaeans, right? Now, there are two theories as to what happened. Three theories, actually, if you really look at it. The historical community is split, and one half of them, or a third of them, believe there was an earthquake and a volcanic eruption that caused so much massive disruption that they were never able to bounce back and they actually collapsed. Then there's another part of the community that says the Mycenaeans just militarily built themselves up and completely dominated and took them over. And then there's a third community that thinks both those things happened, right? I'm a third community person. I think both those things probably happened due to the fact that Canosa, the state that it's in now, shows that it was had been destroyed, and one of their colonies had actually been completely destroyed by a volcanic eruption at one point. So it probably is just a bad time period for them. But the Mycenaean period is what it's going to pass into following the Minoans ones, right? So we've now gone through the Neolithic era, the early Bronze era, the Minoan era, and now we're getting into the Mycenaean era. The big question is where the heck did these Mycenaeans come from, right? So the Mycenaeans came from the grasslands of southern Russia, we'll believe, right? A migratory people. Fun fact, they're actually going to be destroyed by migratory people later. Now, anyway, so the Mycenaeans came from the grasslands of southern Russia to settle on the mainland area of Greece in a place called Peloponnese, right? So the large southern chunk of Greece that traded with and learned a lot from the Minoans, right? So that's how that cup ended up in Mycenae, is because the Mycenaeans are basically the biggest rip-off artists that the world has ever seen, right? They completely ripped off the Minoans. They used their goods, they used their artwork that they had learned from them, they based their writing off of them, like did all kinds of other stuff. So when you look at the Mycenaean people, it goes in two separate phases that gives us a lot of ideas about them as a people, right? So you have the shaft grave era, which is actually, they looked like this, right? So that's a shaft. Oh, crap. Stop it, 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 stop it. Man, all right, here we go. All right, that's a shaft grave right there. So what it is they would actually put like a tombstone at the top, build a shaft of about 40 feet deep in the body and a tomb that was actually like a cutaway area underneath the ground, right? Was actually filled with the dead body and a lot of items. Much like an Egyptian burial, right? Like a royal people, generals, people of status were actually buried with a lot of items. And one of the ways we knew that you were a person of status is if you were buried with one of these things, right? It's called a death mask. Very, very strong militaristic men were actually buried with a golden face mask that went over top of their face. And this right here is probably the most priceless artifact from the Mycenaean era completely. This is believed to be the mask of Agamemnon. Right, so King Agamemnon, the guy that apparently, according to Homer, actually controlled the warrior Achilles, right? So this right here, also in the shaft grave era, you see the construction of early Mycenaean homes. They have a name that starts with an M, but I can never remember what it is. But it became an idea where there was a central courtyard, and it was like a taking of the Canosa style and molding it into individual homes for individual people. And right over here, this kind of gives us a glimpse into their society. They believed the most elite people in society were warriors, right? Warriors would actually wear, in the shaft grave era in early Mycenae, would wear boar tusk helmets, right? Their helmets were actually made out of pieces of boar tusks that they had hunted, right? So to try and show the dominance and the militaristic style of these men. These also right here, these are some replicas of some Mycenaean weapons, right? Several different types of weapons, a lot of different forged goods that they had probably traded with the Minoans for, but they were much more militaristic than the Minoans. So we believe that the Minoans actually saw military or blood sport as a ceremonial thing and not as a way of life, where the Mycenaeans actually believe that military is a way of life, right? So it is a way to show your dominance. And then when the Minoans fell and the Mycenaeans took control of the Aegean as well as the trade routes throughout, that began the Koine era, yeah. Koine meaning in Greek common, all right? It literally means, the Mycenaeans were no slouches. They took over almost this entire area. But when the historical community breaks it down into two phases, we go shaft grave era or we go beehive burial era, right? To give you a heads up, though, look at the advancement in their armor, right? Their armor leapt forward, and this is actually a full armor suit of a Mycenaean soldier. Their fresco and artwork actually leapt forward. They actually copied off of the Minoan systems, and then their graves changed and became much more sophisticated, right? So this is a beehive grave, where they would actually dig into a hill, then carve the middle of it out, lay these bricks on top of each other, looking kind of like a beehive from underneath the ground, and then lay the body of a king or a royal that would be surrounded with treasure on the outside. The doorways were decorated. Musicians would process the people in. Priests and priestesses would bring offerings of food and wine annually. So it became much more of an active, like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like, not like a bury them, they're gone, kind of thing like that and leave, it became much more of an active revisiting of a grave, right? A revisiting of these famous individuals. And then also their art left forward and their trade items left forward. These are some Mycenaean pots that actually began to be distributed all over the Mediterranean. So, and very, very nautical, and I love those pots. I want like a fake one so I can like plant some plants in it and put it in my room. It's really cool. I love octopi. They're really neat. So, the Mycenaeans lived in peace with the Minoans up until about 1500 BC, until when many historians believe that they have attacked them and destroyed them. And like I said, the Mycenaeans are no slouches. Everything in everything in pink was taken over by the Mycenaeans. Absolutely huge, right? Like they were very, very big. And this is where they originally settled, on the mainland area called Peloponnese, right? You need to remember where this is. Peloponnese. It's right here, okay? So anyway, going forward though, their writing was actually a totally derived from Linear A. But here's the big difference between their writing and Minoan writing. We actually can translate parts of Minoan or Mycenaean writing. Linear B, their script, is the foundation of modern Greek. There are bits and pieces of it that we can actually read, and mainly because we can see that they also probably traded with the Phoenicians and borrowed some of their letter systems as well. So, at their height, the Mycenaeans also created this huge military stronghold called Mycenae, right? It rivaled the size of Canosa and was the political and military hub of their entire kingdom. One of the coolest things about it was the only entrance in and out of it was actually this thing called the Lion's Gate, right? Which showed just how strong and just how developed they really, really were. That they had an entrance of one in, one out with a series of locks that if an invading army were to ever break through one of their original walls, they would still have multiple layers of protection to be able to take them out. Just really cool when you think about it. And this is what we believe what Mycenae actually looked like at its height before it was destroyed later on, right? And again, you can see where they have borrowed a lot of the architectural themes of the Minoans. This right here is one of the original shaft grave burial sites. It's called Shaft Grave Circle A. And then later on, when they actually became much more advanced, they built onto the hill, expanded their city, put defensive walls and fortifications around, and then would begin to do beehive burials out towards the backside of their land. So, continuing forward, though, this is the crazy part. The Mycenaeans were actually strong. Write this down really quick. The Mycenaeans were actually very strong and developed right around the same time that the Egyptians were at their height. So during the New Kingdom era of the Egyptians, the Mycenaeans were very developed, right? And that was also when the Hittites were becoming very developed and about to go in and take over the Egyptians. It's also the same time that the, who else we got over here? We got the Babylonians over here, and then we had the Assyrians on their way in growth, right? So these guys are not like those people ended and Mycenaeans popped up. The Mycenaeans were like the ancient Greeks and the people that actually kind of gave the footing for the Greeks that you know of today. And funny enough, they had a huge rivalry with one of these groups. Does anybody want to guess who it is? Anybody? Good job, Christian. And I also heard Sadie over on the backside. Very impressive. The Hittites, right? The Hittites and them did not get along at all. So the Hittites had one small advantage. They were learning how to forge iron slowly, while the Mycenaeans were still using bronze weapons. But then we believe of this war with Troy, speaking of this Hittite rivalry, right? So the Trojan War epic cycle began out of this entire thing. So this is believed to have been a feud that they had with the Hittites. And this war that happened in Troy was possibly for control of trade routes through the Aegean. So the Hittites controlled like small islands that were in the Aegean Sea, areas in Asia Minor and modern-day Turkey, right, where the Mycenaeans wanted some control. And the belief is that the Mycenaeans actually might have pushed some rebellions to actually go underway and against the Hittites, and that they actually had a coalition of Greek city-states that went out and besieged the city-state of Troy because they were aligned with the Hittites originally. Now, it did not happen the way that Homer said it did, which, of course, the thing you know about the Trojan War, of course, is about 500 years later, a blind Greek poet named Homer told the story of the Trojan War, right? It didn't happen like that at all. Agamemnon was dead like hundreds of years before that ever even occurred, and he was just a very famous figure, so of course Homer didn't know any better, and of course the big thing that he added into it was of course the Trojan Horse, which there is no real archaeological evidence of whatsoever. There are ruins in Troy, so we do know that that place was destroyed at one point, but Like, I don't, like, so, like, but it did not occur the way that Homer said it did, unfortunately. So, ironically enough, Homer's really the only, like, ideas that we have from the Dark Ages at all, right? So, but what we're going to do is we're going to stop right there, all right? Some of y'all are probably already drawing some little stuff, but I want to stop right there so we can make sure we clean up everything that your English classes may be confusing with other stuff, and then we're going to kind of briefly go over the Dark Ages, because all we can do is briefly go over the Dark Ages whenever you're talking about it in class. And then we're going to get into the Archaic period in Greece, which is the establishment of your boys Sparta and Athens. And I know Dean right now is like, hooray, I agree. And I know Michael's over there like freaking out too, because I know he likes the Greek stuff as well. So let's get into this, all right? Let's make sure that we're actually together when we discuss the stuff that's really, really important. And we're going to end it there, right? So have fun at your confirmation, Kelly and Dan. I really hope that y'all enjoy yourselves. It's a big, big step in the Catholic community. So congratulations. Happy confirmation. And to everybody else, great week this in class. I'm still so impressed with y'all's tests. Just keep killing it. Keep kicking butt. Enjoy being smart. It's not something you get. It's something you earn, right? You got to like it. You got to enjoy it. You got to want to be intelligent. So get out there, find any chance you can to become a little bit more intelligent today, and I hope y'all have a great weekend. And I'll see y'all later, all right?